call us all the time stressed out about when they should enroll in Medicare. A lot of people think if they don't enroll at age 65, they're going to face penalties. But here's the thing, not everyone has to enroll at age 65, and you won't face any penalties at all. So today we're going to talk about two different sides of this, the people who absolutely must enroll in Medicare at age 65, and the people who should not enroll in Medicare at 65 because it would be a total waste of money. We're going to make sure you know which side you fall on and exactly when to enroll. So we're going to look at three different groups today, actually. Those who must enroll in Medicare at 65, those of you who should not enroll in Medicare at 65, and then there's some of you who fall into a category where you possibly could enroll at 65, but it may not be the best option for you, and you have to do some comparisons. So we'll kind of talk about that, and again, make sure you know which group you belong to. So let's start by looking at those who must enroll at age 65. So, and this says you must enroll because if not, you could face penalties, okay? So the first one are those who are no longer working. They're not covered by an employer plan or a spouse's employer plan, okay? If you have no insurance, then you're going to need to enroll in Medicare, because if you turn 65 and you don't enroll and you don't have other creditable coverage, you're going to face penalties. The next group of people who absolutely must enroll are those of you who are on an ACA or a marketplace plan. Now, these plans, when you turn 65, you're going to lose your financial incentives, your tax credits that you got to have this plan. So when you turn 65, those go away. It would be very expensive and costly. It would not make sense. So they want you to go on to Medicare, okay? Now, the next group would be COBRA. So the reason you must enroll in Medicare when you turn 65, if you have COBRA, is because when you turn 65, COBRA is going to move to the second payer position. They will become the second payer, okay? That means they're going to pay 20%. And this is going to leave the first payer slot empty if you don't enroll in Medicare. So COBRA thinks, hey, this person's 65, they need to be on Medicare, that needs to be in the first payer position slot. We're going to pay second payer. So an example of this is if you had a $100,000 bill and you're on COBRA and you're not on Medicare, they're going to say, okay, we're going to pay $20,000 of this. We'll pay 20% because we're in the second payer position. And there's going to be a bill left of $80,000 that if you have no one in that first payer position, you're going to be responsible for. So COBRA, when you turn 65, must enroll in Medicare. Same thing with TRICARE. So TRICARE, those of you who are retired military, TRICARE is also going to move to the second payer position. It will coordinate with Medicare in the first payer spot. So you need to make sure that you enroll in Medicare if you have TRICARE when you turn 65 years old. And the last one are those of you with a small employer. So the government considers a large employer 20 people or more on the payroll. So if you have 19 employees on the payroll or fewer, that's considered a small employer. And it's exactly the same thing as COBRA or TRICARE. That small employer plan could say, hey, that person should be on Medicare at 65. We are going to be in the second payer position. And they would not cover you in that first payer spot. So that could leave real financial risk for you if you don't enroll in Medicare. All right, so one of the main things people worry about is getting a penalty if you must enroll at 65 and you don't. So let's look at some of these penalties are. So first of all, Part A, most of you, 99% of you are getting Part A for $0. So for this, you don't really have to worry about it because you know, penalty of 10% of zero is zero. So you're probably not going to get a penalty on Part A. Now, if you're one of those rare people that actually does have to pay for Part A, there would be penalties on it. Now, Part B, you're going to get a 10% penalty for every 12 months you go without coverage, okay? So 10%, that is of that year's premium. So this year, the premium for Part B is $185. So if you were going to have a penalty, that would be $18.50 for 1 year, okay? And they would add that to this amount, so you would pay that for your premium instead. So just think, if you don't enroll in Medicare for 3 years, that's now a 30% penalty. And this is a penalty for life that you cannot get rid of. So just know, if you do get a penalty for Part B, that is 10% of that year's premium, which tends to go up year after year, and that is a lifetime penalty. Now for a Part D plan, if you don't have creditable drug coverage, you have 63 days to get a drug plan. And if you don't, you're going to have a 1% penalty for every single month that you don't have a drug plan. So the other day, I actually talked to a lady who was 85 years old and did not have a Part D drug plan. She never signed up for one. So you think about that, that's 20 years of not having a drug plan and a 1% penalty every month for that. So it's like she's never going to be able to get a drug plan. But just know that's 1% of the Part D average premium. So I think this year the average Part D premium in 2025 was around $35. So it will be 1% of that. It's a small fee, but again, it's for every month you don't have creditable drug coverage. And that compounds, and that is a lifelong penalty. Now let's talk about those of you who absolutely do not need to enroll in Medicare at 65, okay? That would be those of you who are still covered by either your own work's employer plan or a spouse's employer plan. Now, if you have coverage to an employer or spouse's employer, why would you pay double? It wouldn't make sense to enroll in Medicare, pay for the employer plan, and pay for Medicare. So you don't need to enroll, but there are a few things that you need to be careful of with your employer coverage. So first of all, you need to make sure that's a large employer. So what we talked about, if it's a small employer with 19 or fewer people on the payroll, you will need to enroll in Medicare. But if you're with a large employer, either your own work or your spouse's, and there's 20 or more people on the payroll, then you do not have to enroll in Medicare. You can continue to work for as many years as you want to work, and when you're ready to quit working or you come off of that employer plan, then you can join Medicare, okay? Another thing you want to make sure of is that it is considered creditable coverage. So Medicare has standards that employer coverage or the spouse's employer coverage must be creditable coverage. That means it has to be at least as good as, if not better, what Medicare offers. So you can always go to your HR department and make sure and check, is your employer plan creditable coverage? And then you will be good. You don't need to enroll in 65, okay? Now, some people will take Part A while they're still working, because Part A, like I said, for 99% of you who've worked for 40 quarters or 10 years and paid into the system, is going to be $0. It doesn't cost you anything. And Part A is that inpatient hospitalization coverage. So, if you're on an employer plan and you want to take Part A when you turn 65, go ahead. It's $0, and it might pay second to your employer plan and give you some extra coverage. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you have an HSA account, this is a health savings account through your employer, those are fantastic accounts to have. Your company puts money into that, you put money into that, and it's all tax-free. You want to say no to Part A, because if you enroll in Part A, you're no longer allowed to put money into your HSA account. That money's still yours, you can take it out, but you're not allowed to put new money into that account. So if you are contributing to or have an HSA account, you would want to say no to Part A. Now, a side note, you'd want to make sure if you're going to still be working at age 65 or 66, you want to know about the earnings test. And remember, the earnings test is just that you can only make a certain amount of money while you're collecting Social Security before your full retirement age. So that's just a side note. If you are like 65 and working, a lot of you, your full retirement age is going to be at 66 or 67, depending on what year you were born. So just be aware, if you continue to work and you're going to take Social Security benefits early, watch out for that earnings test. Now, another important thing to note is just because you're turning 65 at work, they also cannot force you to go off of your employer plan and onto Medicare. You're allowed to keep your employer plan. If you like your employer plan and you're going to keep working, your HR department, your company is not allowed to try and force you off of their employer plan and tell you have to go into Medicare at age 65. That's just not true. You can continue to work for as long as you want. You will be able to come into Medicare once you're ready to retire. Hey, if you found this video helpful, do us a favor. Go give us a like. We always appreciate it. And subscribe so you don't miss out on any of those future
future videos. And leave us a comment. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We'd love to answer any questions you have. That's what it's here for. So drop us a comment below.
All right, so those of you who do not have to enroll in Medicare at age 65, let's talk about what that looks like when you are ready to retire and you do want to come into Medicare. So whether you work till you're 67, 68, 75 years old, as long as you have creditable coverage back to age 65, that's what matters. So you just want to make sure you have no gaps in coverage through that employer plan or your spouse's employer plan from age 65 until you're ready to retire, okay? This is called a special enrollment period. So when you do retire, you're going to get an SEP, and that is a special enrollment period. So what would happen is when you lose your employer coverage, you're going to have 8 months from when you lose your coverage to get enrolled in Medicare A and B before you would have any penalties. Now, even though you have 8 months to enroll, you wouldn't want to do that, right? Because you wouldn't want to go without coverage. If you're going to retire in, say, November, your coverage is going to end November 30th or the end of November, you would want to make sure you start Medicare December 1st, okay? Now remember, when you retire, if they offer you COBRA and you're after 65 years old, you don't want to take that because remember, COBRA falls in that second payer position. But when you are ready to retire, so let's say you're 68 years old, you're ready to retire, you're going to come in through your special enrollment period. And this is going to give you that window to enroll in Part A and Part B. But what's really important about this is you're going to have something called a 6-month Medigap OEP. Actually, everyone has this when they enroll in Medicare, but you're also going to have it if you enroll after age 65. So let's say you're 68 years old, you're ready to retire, you now can get a supplemental plan. So that's either a Plan N or a Plan G without any medical underwriting. So no medical questions asked. It doesn't matter what your current health is, what your previous health issues are, and that's lining up with your Part B start date. So pretty much if you're going to enroll in Medicare for a December start date, you would have December, January, February, March, April, and May. You would have until May to get one of those plans, a G plan or an N plan. And a lot of people, it's important to know this because a lot of people don't know about this 6-month window when they first enroll. This may be your one and only shot to get one of those supplemental plans if you've had poor health, okay? And they're gonna ask about all kinds of things like, heart problems, diabetes, cancer, things like that. So no matter when you enroll, it lines up with your Part B start date, okay? But just know, even if you work till you're 70 years old, you still don't have to enroll in Medicare until you're ready. You're going to get a special election period, you're going to get or special enrollment period, your SEP, when you're ready to leave your employer plan. Okay, so if you do continue to work and you don't enroll at Medicare at age 65, you come in later, are there extra steps you have to take? Well, the answer is yes. So there are some forms you have to fill out. One is called a L564, and this is actually a paper form that you will take to your employer or your spouse's employer, whoever you have that group coverage through. You give it pretty much to the HR department, and it's a form that they're going to fill out to prove and verify, yes, this person has had creditable drug coverage since they were 65 years old, or creditable coverage since you were 65 years old. It's going to prove that you've had no gaps in coverage. So you'll want to make sure your HR department signs that and you turn that in. And you can turn that in, you can upload it online at ssa.gov, you can drop it off at the Medicare office, you can fax it, you can mail it in, however you choose. Then there's another form that goes with it, and this is called the CMS 40B. And this just lets Medicare know when you want to start your Medicare, right? So if you're going to enroll and you're going to start your Medicare in December, you just fill out that form and say, hey, I'd like to start my benefits, my Medicare Part B, on December 1st. So these are a couple extra pieces of paper that you have to do if you come into Medicare and enroll after age 65. So we just talked about those of you who are on an employer plan and you don't have to enroll in Medicare at 65. But here's the thing, what if you're not super in love with your employer plan? Not everybody has a great employer plan. And that brings us to the third group of people who they may not have to enroll in Medicare, but should you? And what we're going to do is we're going to compare and look at your Medicare options compared to what your employer plan is, right? And we're going to choose the better option. So it's a deal where you don't necessarily have to come into Medicare because you have group coverage through an employer, but it may not be the best option. Maybe Medicare is a better fit. All right, so let's talk about those of you who are on have options, right? Should you or should you not enroll? Well, first of all, we're going to compare Medicare to your employer plan. But one thing to think of, again, is that rule about the HSA. If you're contributing to an HSA account, you like that account, you want to keep putting money into that, you're not going to want to enroll. Because to have Part B, you have to have Part A. And remember, once you get Part A, you can no longer contribute money to that HSA account. So something to think about. Now, the next thing we want to take into consideration is, what is your monthly premium? So what do you pay to have that employer plan? Now, Medicare is $185 to have basic Part B Medicare in 2025, okay? I think that is going up. We've heard the number $206.50 as far as what that's going to be in 2026. So if you're on an employer plan and you're paying $60 a month for it and it's great coverage, it wouldn't really make sense to come off of that and go to Medicare that's $185, and then you're going to add probably a supplemental plan or an Advantage plan, whatever, to that. So look at that premium. What are you paying? I'd say if you're at $250 or below and you're happy with your employer plan, then you probably are going to be better off to stay with that and not go into Medicare. Some other things to think about is, who else is covered on this employer plan? So maybe your spouse is on it or you have dependents on it. Well, then you're going to have to stay on it, right? Because if you come off, they're probably not going to let your spouse stay on it, and that spouse is going to need the coverage. Now, this is something to think about. Every now and then we have a husband and wife where the person who is employed, let's say the wife is employed, it's very inexpensive for her to have the coverage. Maybe it's $80 for her to have the coverage, but for her to have her husband with her on that plan, the spouse is like $280 extra. So a lot of times the employer pays less and the spouse pays more. So sometimes we have a split decision with couples. If that husband is 65 years old and he can go to Medicare, sometimes that wife kicks him off the plan and says, hey, I'm going to stay with my employer. I'm going to stay on my $60 plan that I have through work, but you cost me more money. You go to Medicare, okay? So that's just some things to think about when you're dealing with husband and wife and the employer plan. We also want to look at the deductible. So what's the deductible for your plan? Do you have a really high deductible? Like I know in my work plan, I think it's $1,500 that I have to meet before they start paying, right? There's other things to take in consideration. What are your co-pays? So when you go to the doctor or a specialist or the emergency room or you're in the hospital, like what do you have to pay on your employer plan? Also, what's your max out of pocket? This is a big one. And a lot of people don't think about this, especially if you're healthy, but this is like the most worst case scenario. You have a really horrible year. What's the most you would have to pay out of pocket on your employer plan? Okay. Now, for medications, one thing to think of too also is, how much are your medications you're on through your employer plan? Now, here's the thing. If you are on Medicare, you're going to get a Part D plan or Part D drug coverage. And Medicare actually has a cap on what you pay for medications. This year it's $2,000. Next year it's going to be $2,100. Okay, so that means if your medication is covered on a formulary, let's say you're on a very, very expensive medication, you might have to pay thousands of dollars for that on your work plan because there's no cap. But Medicare plans for pharmaceuticals, those drugs, they have a cap. Once you reach $2,100 next year in 2026, you pay nothing else for the rest of the year. So that might be a reason alone to go to Medicare if you're on expensive medications through an employer plan. Now, the last thing to look at are networks, okay? So your employer plan is probably going to be either an HMO or a PPO, something like that. Are you happy with the networks of who you can see with your employer plan? Now, depending on how you decide to use your Medicare benefits, you could go either the supplemental route or you could go the Advantage plan route. If you get a supplemental plan, there are really no networks. You can see any doctor in the whole United States that takes original Medicare. So if you do have health issues on that employer plan and you have a limited network, that might be a reason you want to go to Medicare if you're looking to do a supplemental plan where you can see any doctor and have a lot of flexibility and a lot of freedom with who you see to get care. Another thing to consider is if you fall into a special category where you're either in the military or you're a federal employee. So for VA, you don't have to enroll in Medicare if you have VA benefits, but sometimes people will want to enroll in Medicare because of the network. So they can actually go off base outside of the VA system, and they just have some more options as far as providers and care that they can receive. And other groups of people like the retired federal workers, they have FEHB, and sometimes this can be very expensive. You pay a lot of money for this. So they will decide to go into Medicare. And a lot of times those people will do something called an MA only plan. It's a Medicare Advantage plan, but they're getting their drug coverage through this FEHB program. So we don't have the drug coverage in this Advantage plan. It's just a MA, Medicare Advantage only plan. And a lot of times it's kind of cool because you'll have the Advantage plan, you'll have the option there, but you'll also have something called a Part B give back. And this give back literally gives you back money towards your Part B premiums. You know, that Part B premium this year is $185. And because you're not getting your drug coverage through the Advantage plan, because you're getting it through FEHB, they'll say, hey, well, we're going to give you back $100 a month towards your Part B, or we're going to give you back $150 back towards your plan. So the Part B give back is kind of nice. So these are a couple rare instances where people, like if you're in VA or FEHB, you don't necessarily have to enroll in Medicare, but sometimes people choose to for these reasons. All right, so hopefully now you know which group you're in, right? If you are with a small employer of 19 people or less, or if you're not working or not covered on a group plan, if you have an ACA plan, or if you have COBRA or TRICARE, you must enroll in Medicare at age 65. If you're going to stay with an employer and keep working, your spouse's employer plan, and that is a large employer with 20 or more employees, and it is creditable coverage, then you can stay with that employer plan and you do not have to enroll in Medicare at 65. And just remember, for those of you who are going to keep working, you don't have to enroll, but you should always remember to compare your employer plan to Medicare and see what's the better option for you. Now, if you don't know a lot about Medicare plans and how they work, you want to learn more about Advantage plans or supplemental plans, you can always call, and our guides are here. That's what we do. We educate people. So we can talk to you about your different options of how you can use Medicare, what will cost you, and the different plans available in your area.